Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at section 9.3 and 9.4. So we're going to be solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula, and we're going to look at complex numbers. So remember that ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 is my standard quadratic equation. And when I'm trying to solve it, it's going to be equal to 0. So, I want you to pause it. I want you to write down what this phrase is. The negative boy couldn't decide whether or not to go to the radical party. The square boy missed out on 4 awesome chicks, and it was all over at 2 a.m. It will help you with remembering the formula if you don't already know it. So yeah. Alright. So, if your quadratic equation isn't factorable, so that means that factoring is fun, worksheet will not work. So if it's not factorable, so this is section 6.5. If you can't use the square root property, meaning that you're missing your b, or if it's in x plus b parentheses squared equals k form, or if you can't complete the square, which remember, 3 terms, a equals 1, and your b is even. If those 3 don't work, then and only then can you use your quadratic formula. I don't want you to use it if you can do one of these 3 because it's going to be a lot easier. This one, the formula is pretty long, and if you mess up at the beginning, then it's not going to be helpful for you. Okay, so standard form for a quadratic equation, again, is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You have to identify your a, b, and c. So here's the formula. X equals the negative boy couldn't decide, plus or minus, whether or not to go to the radical party. The square boy missed out, minus 4 awesome chicks, and it was all over at 2 a.m. Now, there is YouTube videos on the song for Row, Row, Row Your Boat to know the quadratic equation, and there's a rap video as well if you want to check it out, but these are just techniques. You need to make sure to know them. The common mistakes that I see is the equation is not equal to x. You got to make sure it's x equals and then plug in that equation. And everything on the right side is divided by 2a. So you need to make sure absolutely everything, not just the radical. Alright, how to use a quadratic equation. What you want to do is put the equation into standard form. So you want it in the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. You want to identify your ABCs, and then you're going to plug and chug. You must write your formula every time. So remember, it's x equals the negative boy couldn't decide whether or not to go to the radical party. The square boy missed out on 4 awesome chicks, and it was all over at 2 a.m. When simplifying, you want to make sure and also use your order of operations. So that's please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Okay, so let's do it. So first thing that you want to do is you want to put the equation into standard form. So you have 2x squared minus 7x equals 9. So first thing you want to do is you want to subtract the 9 on both sides. So you get 2x squared minus 7x minus 9 equals 0. If you do just a quick check, you have 3 terms. Your b is not even, so you can't complete the square. And this is an a does not equal 1. Which I don't know necessarily if it's going to be factorable that way. So, we're going to use the quadratic formula here. First step, put it in standard form. Second step, ABCs. Your A equals 2, your B equals negative 7, and your C equals negative 9. Okay, then after that we have to plug it into the formula. So we got x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I won't give you that formula, so you need to make sure and have it memorized, and it needs to be written on every problem. Okay, so then after you write a formula, it becomes a simple plug and chug. So I go negative b plus or minus the square root of negative b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times my a, which is 2. Alright, then it becomes a cleanup. Negative times a negative is a positive, so positive 7 plus or minus the square root. Negative 7 squared is going to be 49. Now, watch me really quick. People mess up their signs all the time right here. So if I have a negative times a positive, I'm going to have a negative result. And then a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. So first thing I would want to deal with is I want to deal with my signs. So I've got a negative times a positive, so it's a negative. Negative times a negative, which gives me a positive. Once I deal with my signs, then I can just look at the whole numbers. So 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 9 is going to be 72. I'm sorry, yeah, 8 times 9 is going to be 72. And that's going to be all over 2 times 2, which is 4. So I've got 7 plus or minus the square root, and 49 plus 7 is 121, which is definitely a perfect square. So I've got 7 plus or minus 11 over 4. And because they're all whole numbers, I've got to break it up. So I've got x equals 7 plus 11 over 4, and I got x equals 7 minus 11 over 4. So 7 plus 11 is going to be 18 over 4, which will reduce down to 9 over 2, which if you put it in your calculator and got 4.5, either one of those two answers would work for me. 7 minus 11 is negative 4 over positive 4, which would be negative 1. Okay? So that's how you go through the process with the quadratic formula. It is so easy to mess this part up right here, so that's why it's always your last result. Okay, let's try another one. So we have x squared plus 2 equals 6x. First thing I gotta do is put it in standard form, so I'm gonna subtract the 6x on both sides. And I want to put it in standard form, so I got x squared minus 6x plus 2 equals 0. Then I'm going to identify my a, b, c's. My a is 1, my b is negative 6, and my c is positive 2. Then I want to write down my formula, so x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Once I write my formula, then it becomes a simple plug and chug. So I'm going to go negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 parentheses squared minus 4 times 1 times 2, because that's my AC, all over 2 times 1. Alright, so I got x equals, negative times a negative is a positive, so 6 plus or minus the square root. Negative 6 squared is going to be 36. Negative times a positive is a negative. Negative times a positive is going to be a negative, so I've got my negative right there. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is going to be 8. And that's going to be all over 2 times 1, which is just 2. So I got 6 plus or minus the square root of 28 over 2. Now I've got to clean this up just a little bit. Factors of 28, 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 and 7. Perfect square is 4. So I got 6 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 7 over 2, which would be 6 plus or minus 2 square root 7 over 2. And then the last thing that I've got to do, so I got a triangle cancel. And what goes into 6, 2, and 2? That would be 2. So x equals 6 divided by 2 is 3. Plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, square root of 7. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So this would be my final answer. So hopefully this process is making a little bit more sense. Alright, before you start this Now You Try, I want you to change this positive 2 to a negative 2 for me. And I want you to pause it, and I want you to go through the process. So we got negative 2a squared minus 6x minus 9 equals 0. It's already in standard form for us, so we're going to go a equals negative 2, b equals negative 6, and c equals negative 9. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to write a formula, so x equals the negative boy couldn't decide whether or not to go to the radical party. Square boy missed out on 4 awesome chicks, and it was all over at 2 a.m. So I'm going to go negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 parentheses squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 9 all over 2 times negative 2. When I clean that up, that's going to be a positive 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. Negative times a negative is a positive. Positive times a negative is a negative. 4 times 2 is going to be 8. 8 times 9 is going to be 72. And that's going to be all over negative 4. So that will be 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 36 over negative 4, which will clean up to be 6 plus or minus 6i over negative 4. And remember, we can't have a negative in the denominator, and they're all even, so we're going to divide everything by negative 2 this time. So we got x equals 6 divided by negative 2 is negative 3, plus or minus 6i divided by negative 2 is going to be 3i, and then negative 4 divided by negative 2 is going to be a positive 2. And that would be my solution. Okay? Alright, so now, for this next you try, you can decide. You can either subtract the negative 9x squared on both sides, or you can bring over the 42x minus 49. I am going to subtract 9x squared on both sides, just so we can stay consistent. So I'll have 0 equals negative 9x squared plus 42x minus 49. Okay, so pause it, do your ABCs, and go through the process. Okay, my A equals negative 9, my B equals 42, my C equals negative 49. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember, if you don't write your formula, I'm going to take half off, so please make sure that you write it. So this would be negative 42 plus or minus the square root of 42 squared minus 4 times negative 9 times negative 49 all over 2 times negative 9. Okay, so this would be x equals negative 42 plus or minus the square root. 42 squared is 1,764. Negative times a negative is a positive. Positive times a negative is going to be a negative. 4 times 9 is 36. 36 times 49 is 1,764 over negative 18. So those two cancel out with each other, so square root of 0 is 0, so all I'm left with is 42 over negative 42 over negative 18, and we know a negative over a negative is going to be a positive. And then what can go in 42 and 18 is 6. So our answer is going to be 42 divided by 6 is 7. 18 divided by 6 is going to be 3. And that's your final answer. Okay? The last one that we have is we have a fraction, because on your homework you have a fraction problem as well. So I want us to make sure and go through this together. So, for consistency's sake, let's go ahead and let's subtract the 1/2 x and add 1/3 on both sides. Subtract 1/2 x plus 1/3. This one is as hard as it's going to get. So we got 1 over 12x squared minus 1 over 2x plus 1 over 3. Alright, so I want you to pause it. I want you to identify your ABCs, and I want you to go through the process. This one's hard. Alright, so my A is 1/12. My B is -1/2. And my C is 1/3. Alright, I'm going to start up here just because we're going to need the room. So I got x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So when I plug it in, it's going to be -1/2 or -1/2 plus or minus the square root of -1/2 squared minus 4 times 1/12 times 1/3 all over 2 times 1/12. Give you a second to copy that down. Okay, so let's clean this up. Negative times a negative is a positive, so I got 1/2 plus or minus the square root. -1/2 squared is going to be positive 1/4. Negative times a positive is a negative. Negative times a positive is a negative, so I'm going to go minus. And I'm going to put this over 1 so that I can use some cross canceling. So if I cross cancel, the 4 and the 12 will definitely cancel out. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 12 divided by 4 is going to be 3. So all I have is 1/9. And that's going to be all over, put this over 1, cross cancel, 1, 6. So it'll be 1/6. And now I've got to clean up what's in my square root. So if I clean this up, 4 and 9 are not the same, but their LCD would be 36. So I've got to change that to 36. 4 times what gives me 36? That would be 9. 36. That would be 4. So 4 times 1. So essentially I have 1/2 plus or minus the square root. 4 minus 9 is 5. So 5/36 divided by 1/6. So x equals 1/2 plus or minus. And right here, if I break this up, I go to the square root of 5 over the square root of 36, which would be the square root of 5 doesn't clean up, but the square root of 36 will, and that will be 6 over 1/6. So now I have to combine these together, so I have to have a common denominator. So it will be 6, so I change this one to 6. So this would be 2 times what gets me to 6, that would be 3. So essentially I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 6 divided by 1/6. So this is actually what we did in chapter 7 if you need to go back and look at it. Okay, and now we have a complex fraction. So with a complex fraction, the next thing that we do is we do the keep, change, flip. So x equals, we keep the first, so 3 plus square root of 5/6. We change from division to multiplication, and then we flip, so that would be 6/1. When we multiply fractions, we cross cancel. There's nothing that can cross cancel from top to bottom, but from bottom to top it can cancel. And all I'm left with is 3 plus or minus the square root of 5. I know this problem is hard, but go back and re-look at it and kind of talk yourself through the process. Alright, so for this homework assignment, 9.3 and 9.4, you need to make sure and write your quadratic equation every single time. Identify those A, B's, and C's, and then it should be a plug and chug. You need to make sure and show all work. Thank you.